I've been refusing all the games offered to me for a long time, but taking advantage of the fact that I was on vacation, I ended up accepting Neocon Tower Defense 3, because I like the genre and because it seemed like a cool game. It was exactly that and nothing more than that. Neocon Tower Defense 3 is, as the name suggests, a tower defense game. What it doesn't say is that it is played in an isometric perspective, with the traditional ability to rotate the board and the perspective to practically anyone that we can imagine. There is no story, nor it is necessary in this case. The game's soundtrack immediately stuck in my ear, not because it was memorable, but because one of the songs is shared with Forza Motorsport's menu, or it is, at least, very similar to it. So much so that I even minimized the game to confirm if I had left it open in the background. It's essentially calm music, what makes sense because the game is surprisingly slow-paced. I've usually looked for this genre to casually sink some hours, but I usually prefer more fictional games with aliens, monsters and/or with various degrees of elements that can make me imagine that I live in any other planet. When here the units look for a more realistic tone in their design, and there are several different enemy units. Infantry units, mechanized land and air units, all of them with characteristics distinct enough to make us change priorities or strategies to be able to deal with them more efficiently. And since we are talking about enemies, let's continue on this topic. These appear to us from different points in the scenario and in progressively greater quantities. And although the difficulty increases if we talk about it in general terms, the truth is that there are more advanced levels that are easier than previous ones. And this focus on the number of enemies leads to very funny situations, as there are times when there are too many for the route they have to take, and they appear on the screen as if fighting over the space they occupy on the set, something that we can exacerbate if we place a barrier very close to the entry point on the board, which invariably causes a larger crowd of units than the one that the game can handle, throwing some units off their course. Theoretically, this wouldn't be a problem, but at this moment the game doesn't seem to know what to do with them, leaving them standing still shooting into the ether outside the playable area. From a certain level onwards, bosses begin to appear, which are units capable of absorbing much more damage while also being able to produce their own units as they advance in the battleground. These bosses can be terrestrial or aerial, and from a certain point on, both can appear at the same time, considerably complicating our mission. Enemies are sent in clearly demarked waves, giving us time to prepare for the next one, whether by placing defenses or units. The challenge is clearly designed considering that the player will increase the game's difficulty and not do the synergy between units or waves, which apparently does not exist at all, but that synergy exists within the defensive units that we have. With what we learn at different levels, we will become deadly efficient killing machines. Apparently, Neocon Tower Defense 3 is a very simple game. One or two turrets, if equipped with the proper upgrade, are more than enough to calmly take us throughout all levels. It must be admitted that there is no balance between different weapons, as some of the turrets are so versatile that they can practically eliminate the use of others, even if those others are more efficient for certain situations. For example, there are some turrets that are extremely efficient against infantry, others against mechanized land enemies, but there are others that, in addition to being interestingly good against infantry and mechanized land units, can still attack air units. And then we have to think about whether it's worth to put the more specialized ones when we can just place one that can do it all, especially when we only have limited spaces for their placement. Contrary to what would be expected, as the difficulty increases, our strategy becomes stale and not the other way around. I would expect to have to think a lot more the more difficult the game becomes, but it's the other way around. At a certain point there are one or two turrets that become so versatile and overpowered that they are simply indispensable, so their spam is practically unavoidable. The fact that we are not solely dependent on turrets for our defense contributes to this paradox. We can place free defensive walls, cannons, call in air attacks, or use lasers that we can aim at will. All of these different strategic deployable elements are limited by a timer, but with the right strategy they can be employed to stall enemies long enough for our less specialized weapons to deal with them. And they do it so well that sometimes there is still time to place them even between waves. There is a skill tree disguised as a perk system that we unlock depending on the rating with which we beat the levels, but even if we beat each level with full stars we cannot unlock everything there is to unlock. There is also special missions, Spec Ops, that allow us to access more weaponry or defensive options. Not everything went well with my game. On 2 levels the game blocked, not recognizing that I had beaten it. And no matter what I tried to do, I checked the integrity of the files, changed difficulty, changed tactics, reinstalled, started over from the beginning of the game. I got to that point and it always kept looking at me without any advance on the levels. On the Steam forum I found a user with the same problem and the provisional solution provided by the developer was enough for me to move forward, but it cannot be a final solution to this. Unfortunately, one of the levels where I had this issue was the last one, so I couldn't see the end of the game, if he has one at all. There is an interesting option to simulate situations created by us in a simulation room, something very practical to understand the efficiency of each weapon against each unit, and this option is very welcome. The selection of levels is done in a usual Mario-style overworld, here with a War Room skin. But incomprehensibly its presentation is done in a way in which we can never see all the missions at the same time. I mean, if the map focuses on Australia, we cannot see the missions from the North American continent. In practice, I only see one reason why at an advanced stage of the game you would want to return to an initial mission, to try to complete it with all the stars. But even so, it is a strange design option. Neocon Tower Defense 3 doesn't discover or reinvent the wheel, but it's a competent game at a fair price. It took me approximately 5 hours to complete it, and we have to consider that I spent some time trying to solve the bug that wouldn't let me advance. But on the other hand, I also only played the last missions on higher difficulties. If I had done so since the beginning, it would certainly take me longer to do it. I also don't see much of a reason to play it again, nor does the game seem memorable enough to me to return to it in the future. But whoever buys it probably won't regret doing so, as it is fun enough for what it promises to do. See you next time, guys. Bye!